Hello, everyone. My name is Phung Thi Thanh from Hanoi National University of Vietnam. Today, I am happy to present my paper at the conference of ANS 2021 via Zoom like this. First of all, I wish all of us a safe and a happy New Year. My paper will explore the history of naming Hanoi streets from the French colonial time to the present. From 1888 to the present, Hanoi City has undergone with three political powers. The French colonial government executed the city from 1888 to 1954. In 1945, two Vietnamese political powers proclaimed the right of power in Vietnam. One was the nation of Vietnam and the other was Democratic Republic of Vietnam, then renamed the Republic Socialist of Vietnam in 1976. As you know, renaming street is common in some countries when the political power shifts. For instance, in Germany, in USSR, in Singapore, and etc. With Hanoi case study, if we think naming street is life, this life in Hanoi started with the applying names on the streets of the French colonial government in the last decade of the 19th century. Then it developed in the colonial time. Next, it was erased completely by Vietnamese political powers in 1945 when the colonialism failed in Indochina. Also, all streets were applied new names. Within 4 decades, recently, the naming street is an urgent act of Vietnam Municipal Committee in new urban areas because the process of urbanization spread rapidly. The first issue I will mention is the politics of decommemoration when political shift. This shift happened when the colonialism failed, also in when Vietnamese political power contested during the period 1945 to 1954. The second issue is the politics of toponymic continuity that displayed the ideology of the government in the post-colonial time. And the last issue is the future of naming street in Hanoi today in the context of a mega cities. Now, firstly, I would like to introduce the space division of Hanoi. As you see, among the three areas of Hanoi, Zone 1 is the smallest area with 34 and 59 square kilometers. However, this area can be seen as a core space of Hanoi City because of its history. Before the French invasion, Hanoi was a city with a royal citadel, the old quarter, general market area, and village around the citadel. The old quarter was where existed streets before the invasion of the French. In fact, the history of 130 years of naming street in Hanoi City was conducted in the space of Zone 1. Zone 2 is the new urban where were built since the 1980s of the 20th century. Before that time, Zone 2 was a rural area, exactly a semi-urban area, where was the home of agricultural products that provided for people living in Zone 1. And Zone 3 is the rural area where the majority of population is a farming worker. In the next slides, I will present the typology of street name in Hanoi City under the French colonial time. Initially, the French municipal government built Hanoi City as two areas. an indigenous area where existed many traditional markets in the east of the citadel. Streets in that area quite small and inconvenient because there was the road that crosses a traditional trade area. The streets were applied names after commodities and handicrafts. In fact, these names were imposed by Vietnamese people in the previous time, but the French government listed them in the French language in the governmental documents to apply the tax. Some Vietnamese historical figures were dedicated there, of course, for the small streets. In the western area, where long and wide streets were built on the traditional village, the French government applied name of French army leaders, soldiers, national leaders of France, and placed name where France had victory in World War I. The naming street after people by France can be considered the contestation of the taboo in Vietnam traditional culture because in Vietnam we avoided the use of official name to indicate ancestor, people who passed away, and those who had a social position. Of course, today this tradition is changed. Please have a look at table in the next slides. In this slides, I present a table of typology of Hanoi street name in the colonial time. As you see, the group of names after historical elite take the biggest proportion and increase rapidly. The group of names after commodities and handicraft is stable. The record of the number of streets associated with a commodity is different among documents. The lowest is 45 streets in the initial colonial time, and the largest is about 70 streets in the post-colonial time. Besides naming street after people, the use number to name street was a new way of naming place that was popular in the colonial time. I want to explain about this. Before the colonial time, Vietnamese sometimes use a number to name the order of children in the family. For example, they call their children by number from the first for the first, the second, and third, like this. But it seems a rarely used number to name place. Number was applied for street that did not build completely or for street would be built in the future. Next, please go to the renaming street from the 1945 to the present. 1945 is the special year in the modern history of Vietnam because this year the French colony was failed in Indochina. The nation of Vietnam was founded in March. Then it lost the right of political power in September and came back with the support of the French army in 1946. The Democratic Republic of Vietnam was founded on the 2nd September in 1945. During 1946 to 1954, these two political powers competed the right of control both in Hanoi and in Vietnam. In August 1945, the mayor of Hanoi under the nation of Vietnam erased all names of streets that were imposed under the French colonial time. And in September, after the proclamation of the new independent government, the mayor of Hanoi under the Democratic Republic of Vietnam launched an announcement of renaming Hanoi streets. Two of these Vietnamese government had a comment that considered Hanoi street named by the French were the imprints of the stigma of nation or imprint of slavery time. In 1945, because the very short time controlling Hanoi City, the nation of Vietnam just renamed 60 streets. Among these names, the majority of names honors Vietnamese heroes, leaders of the defense war in the past, and several kings who led the battle contested the French invaders. Although the nation of Vietnam renamed a few streets, the ideology of the renaming street of nation of Vietnam had affected strongly the next governments. The Democratic Republic of Vietnam renamed all streets approximately some about 290 streets because of the purpose of erasing all imprint of the stigma of the nation, also raising the pride of the glorious past. The Democratic Republic of Vietnam renamed street in the Old Quarter by shifted name from the French language into the Vietnamese language. Also, these government renamed streets after names of national leaders who embedded in the contestation with the abroad invasions. Moreover, renamed streets after a place where was the place of victory of Vietnamese army in history. Especially, the Democratic Republic of Vietnam named some streets around the most important square in Hanoi to display the desire of a future nation. That was Independence Street, Freedom Street, Happiness Street, the Rights of Human Street, People Rights Street, and Democracy Street. It can be seen that the renaming of Hanoi Street during August and September 1945 is the politic of decommemoration. Hanoi is the capital city of Vietnam, also is a center of politics, economy, and culture. By erasing all street names applied by the French government, two Vietnamese governments wanted to express the continuity of national patriotism, and by that act, especially in the context of the colonial time, the governments would have the support from Vietnamese people. However, the politics of decommemoration had not been conducted completely when two Vietnamese political governments shifted the power. The Democratic Republic of Vietnam inherited partly the ideologies of naming streets from the nation of Vietnam. For instance, honors people who defended the French invaders, names of glorious place of Vietnam, and so on. In its turn, after retaking power in 1946, the nation of Vietnam continued to use the majority of names that were applied by Democratic Vietnamese previously. In 1964, it happened the big change with some street name. Besides rewriting some street name with incorrect word and spelling, the main purpose of this change was to rename streets naming after historical figures. Some names of king monarchic members and names of alive people were eliminated. The data in the next slide shows the proportion of street names that were applied by Democratic Republic and Republic Socialist of Vietnam from 1945 to 2019 in Zone 1. It is easy to recognize that the proportion of names after historical figures still have been taken the position of the biggest groups. The next two groups are the group of names after village and the group of names after commodities. Street name after number were replaced by name of people and other kind of names. In the next slides, I will present about naming Hanoi Street from innovation to the present. After the innovation in 1986, the urbanization in Hanoi has developed rapidly, especially since the last decade of the 20th century. The village in Zone 2 were replaced by new streets, area of apartments, shopping malls, and so on. Because of the need to impose names for streets, in 2005, the national government promulgated a decree that included regulation of naming streets in all urban areas in Vietnam. According to this decree, renaming street names that used to be using stably is banned. In Hanoi, the council launched the regulation of naming street in 1998. Then this regulation was revised in 2001, 2006, and 2015. According to these regulations, it must choose names that express good meaning and associate with the glorious memory of the nation, especially the commemoration with a historical figure has to execute after his death at least 10 years. One thing I want to impress that is the participation of residents and mass media in the process of naming streets in this period. Among the 8 steps of applying a name for a street launched by Hanoi Council, Step 4 requires the comment of residents about the name will be imposed. This shows that the naming street in Hanoi today is not only the top-down act, but also the bottom-up voice. Moreover, the Council of Hanoi conducted to create a bank of names to apply for streets in new urban areas. Because of the rapid development of urban area, this bank seems not to enough for the street. In the next slides, the data shows that the group of names after historical elite and the group of names after ancient village are the dominant trend of naming street in Hanoi today. The other thing that I want to stress that is the growth of naming streets with name associated with the eco-environment in the new way is the new way of naming today. This trend is popular in the residence area. Streets have names that have a generic part referring to nature, for instance, lake, river, bay, etc. Albeit the area does not have any geographical feature like this. Some areas plant a kind of flora, then name street after that flower. To sum up this presentation, I would like to stress the difference between Singapore and Hanoi street name. When colonialism failed, the Singaporean Council accepted the coexistence of colonial names and the other kind of names. Meanwhile, Vietnamese political powers decommemorated completely street name applied by the French government. Although two Vietnamese political powers competed for the right of power after colonial time, these governments raised the symbol of nationalism and patriotism from the people. These governments eliminated commemoration of those who represented for political ideology of competitors. However, these governments commemorated those who were ancestors, heroes, and leaders of the defensive war of the nation. Today, the process of naming streets is slower than the process of urbanization in Hanoi. Building a cool and green city may become an important ideology of naming streets. However, to apply names for streets in a mega city, I think the council should think about the use of technology for naming streets. In Ho Chi Minh City, the second largest city in Vietnam, the council applied the QR code to direct and explore the information of streets and urban space. With my own idea, in a mega city that has about 2,000 and more streets, using numbers and technical code is a beneficial way of naming streets. The applying names to play culture and political symbols should execute in some area of the city. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you to our presenter. That was such an interesting presentation. Could you talk a little bit more about the QR code thing that you mentioned at the end? That really piqued my interest. What is the information that can be accessed?
Yes. It is the new way of accessing information of street in the Ho Chi Minh City, not in Hanoi. Ho Chi Minh City is the second largest city in Vietnam, and the council applied a QR code that was put under the side street name, and the traveler can use a smartphone to apply this code, and with this the contact from the smartphone and the QR code on the in the side of the street, the people can see the information, for example, the meaning of name and the history of the people who name it by street on the street, and the restaurant and something like that nearby the street, like this. But this technical code has not applied in Hanoi yet. But I think in the future, soon, maybe it was applied in Hanoi City.
So there's talks of applying that.
Yeah.
There are plans to apply those codes to the signage, but they haven't done it yet.
Yeah, but I think in Ho Chi Minh City, just is a testing project,
Okay.
not for all street name, but in Hanoi it has not yet now.
Yeah, sounds very cool. I like that idea.
Yeah.
Also, well, okay, I have another question, but we've got one in the chat here. Eduardo asks, is this phenomenon observed in all Vietnam? I'm not sure if he's talking about the QR phenomenon or something, another.
Yeah. Eduardo, what do you mean about this phenomenon? What is the phenomenon you want to know? It is a QR code, because Amida mentioned on the phenomenon observed. This a phenomenon, but I don't understand well which phenomenon Eduardo wants to mention on. If you want to mention on the QR code, as I said, it shows a testing project was applied in Ho Chi Minh City, but not in Hanoi yet. Has not in Hanoi yet, but not in all Vietnam. Okay, yeah.
Okay. He says that the facts that you've exposed or presented about Hanoi are these trends also seen throughout Vietnam?
Yeah, and I think in the fact in as you see in my presentation, the naming street in Hanoi in Zone 1 is passed in some period very important. It is maybe from the invasion of French, and then decommemoration by Vietnamese political power, and then by between the Vietnamese political power. So I think it is maybe a typical is in Hanoi is a naming and renaming street is typical. It's like a sample. Maybe from this in other city in Vietnam, maybe learn from Hanoi, because Hanoi is the capital city in Vietnam. So the national government always launched the principle of naming and renaming streets and in Hanoi, and the national government have to decide of naming and renaming Hanoi in Hanoi. Okay, but not today. Today is a municipal committee decided. Yeah. So
Thank you. I have another question, and we have a few more minutes if anybody would like to post a question in the chat. So considering all of these events and the trajectory, how much French does one still see in street naming, if at all?
You mean about the French?
To what degree would you say there is still some use of French in street naming?
Sorry, I don't understand well your meaning in your question. Can you say again?
Yeah, if there are still any uses of French in the street naming, to what degree of the French language in any way?
Yes, because initially when the French came to Hanoi, it lists streets that existed in Vietnam at that time. It is the end of the 19th century. At that time in Hanoi, just have a royal citadel and a traditional trademark area and village around it. So at that time, it not have many streets in Hanoi, just some street in the old quarter. So the French list that name, that street by commodity and handicraft name, of course by French language. So in my research, I did not find the reaction from Vietnamese people with the naming street by French in all culture of Vietnamese people, but I can find the implicit, can I think that implicit reaction from the Vietnamese people, because in the newspaper at the time, they wrote name of streets by Vietnamese. And of course, sometimes by two language, one by Vietnamese and the other in French. And of course, in the Western area, that area is a rural area before the opening street by French. So all street in that area named by French. And of course, some to dedicate Vietnamese people. But that people who associate with the invasion of French. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. I can see some question here.
Are street names actually used for addresses? What do Vietnamese people answer when asked, "Where do you live?" Great question.
Yeah. For the first question, Vietnamese, where do you live, of course, and we have to use street name to address to say about our address, of course. But in the the third question, what common was it for Vietnamese people to speak French themselves during the colonial period? Of course, you know, at the time, Vietnam is under the the colonial times. So Vietnamese people have not right to choose speak French or Vietnamese, but Vietnamese speak some Vietnamese speak French in school, in French school, but in daily life, of course, they use Vietnamese language. Yeah.
And another commenter is kind of comparing, right, the throwing off of French colonial names, replacing them with native ones, reminding of recent events here in the US. Really, we see these patterns internationally, right?
Yeah. Yes, so wait a moment, I will remind you. Okay. Yeah. I think naming and renaming street is not too political. Yes, I agree. It is some is a political act, but the other is the culture. Is associated with the culture and the daily life. But in today in Hanoi, it have no political conflict. I think street name maybe the role of play political symbols is maybe weaker than to present the role of direction in the urban space, because Hanoi today is a mega city. We have 1,000 streets have name, and about 600 streets unnamed, and a lot of streets are creating, and so required name in the future soon. So if we use people's name to apply for street or village name, I think it's not enough, because the Vietnamese people consider about the people who were commemoration for street, because they think which value was selected in this time.
Thank you. There was a follow-up to the question about French in schools. Is it still taught? Danielle asks, is French still taught as a main second language in Vietnam?
Yeah. Can I see it here?
It's at the bottom.
Yeah. Is French still taught? Oh, yes. In Vietnam, there are 5 main foreign language were taught in the school. Is English, of course, French, Chinese, Korean, and Russian, and Japanese, and now is a Korean.
Okay.
But it is not main second language. Just is a 5 important foreign language was taught in Vietnamese school. Yeah.
But you would not characterize it as the main second language anymore. Okay, we have another question here from. Let's take this as our last question from Cleveland.
Yes, Cleveland. Yeah.
I'll read it for everybody in case they're not. Yesterday, we had a presentation which described a neighborhood in Warsaw, Poland, where many streets were named after other countries, such as Brazil and Bulgaria. Are there any streets in Hanoi named after other countries or places in other countries?
Not have in Hanoi. In Hanoi, in the past, French used the place name from country, but I think it's not country's name, just a name of a place, for example, district or village, or where France have a great victory in the World War I. Also today in Hanoi, we use place name from other provinces of Vietnam to name for street in Hanoi, but we don't use the national the country's name to apply for the street. In colonial time, there was 3 street name after country. That is France, of course, and Britain and America. Only in the colonial time, not now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation.